Hi everybody, today we're talking about arms control. Now, I just got to reiterate again, as I do in a couple of the other classes, it's not that I want you to be experts on arms control. In fact, I'm guaranteeing that many of you don't care about arms control at all, except sort of in a peripheral way. This is not so much that you'll know about arms control, but just so we can explore a different area where collective action problems and global governance solutions are implemented. And you can think about how these things apply to your particular project, the thing that you want to make better in the world. One of the things I really want to drive home is that different issues have different problems. And what I mean by that is not all projects that you guys are working on, not all issues that are out there are at the same steps in these processes. Some are further along than others. Some have different challenges than other ones. And let me just give you a quick example here. The first one we're going to talk about with arms control is nuclear nonproliferation. And the thing about nuclear nonproliferation is, it's a really interesting one, is that the United States is willing to pay everything here. We'll fit the whole bill. Whatever solution, if you come up with a solution, the U.S. will pay the bills. There's no collective action problem in that sense. It's like having, the roommates get together and they say, how are we going to get things clean? And one of the roommates says, man, I am so concerned about an unclean house that I will pay for a maid. I will monitor this. I will make sure everything is spick and span because I do not want germs in this house. You guys don't have to do anything. I'll take care of it for us. And they do. They just start pouring out money to make sure this works. That's the same situation we have here. There's no collective action problem. If you come up with some sort of solution, the United States will take care of the bill. Now, there are probably some collective action problems in there, making sure that everybody participates. But here in this case, again, the United States is willing to put everything on the line to make sure every state participates. What we mean by nuclear nonproliferation is a state not getting nuclear weapons that doesn't have nuclear weapons now. This is a really important, crucial thing for the United States. It has been all through the Cold War, post-Cold War. If there is one thing that is our foreign policy priority, it's to make sure that no one can use a nuclear weapon on the United States. That's plain and simple. And so the United States will invest a lot. In fact, all the way to the point that when the Soviet Union collapsed in 1989, 1990, somewhere in that range, when the Soviet Union collapsed, the arch enemy of the United States went over to Russia and gave Russia tons and tons of money and expertise to make sure that all their nuclear material didn't fall into the hands of people that would use it badly. And so nuclear nonproliferation is one of those things where we can say, okay, different issues have different problems. The problem here is not the collective action problem. The problem here is the issue, the solution that we come up with has to be 100%. It has to work. Because if even one nuclear missile gets to a country that doesn't have them, well, then that's it. The United States has lost control of things. And so there's a sense in which this has to work. And that's where the solution comes down. So my challenge to you before we get started on this is know what your issue's particular struggle is. Know where they're at. If you were working on human trafficking 20 years ago, you would have had to been talking about education because nobody really knew what human trafficking was. Today, there's a lot more awareness of it. You have to be talking about some other element of it that you wouldn't have been talking about 20 years ago. And so this is part of the conversation is what exactly is the problem that needs to be sort of fixed here? So when we're talking about nuclear nonproliferation, we're talking about stopping the spread of nuclear weapons. And let's just take a rationalist approach here. Because obviously the constructivist approach is you want states to prefer not to have nuclear weapons, not because it's costly, because they think it's wrong. Great, whatever. That's a long-term game, and the United States is pushing for that. But in the short term, we don't want you to get nuclear weapons. So it's a rationalist approach, and it really comes down to two things. If rationalist approach is about the cost-benefit calculation of the state that's thinking about getting nuclear weapons, then we have to either provide incentives, which means you get benefits if you don't get nuclear weapons, which means we'll give you financial aid. We'll give you, strong diplomatic relations. There's all those sorts of things. And then there's the opposite, which is also true, is punishments. There's going to be costs if you do. Anything from sanctions to airstrikes, to any number of things. We're not afraid to use force when it comes down to these sorts of things. And we have, and we continue to. It could mean cutting off these benefits that we were giving before. So what it comes down to for this, though, is the United States is willing to dump a lot into this, right? So the thing is we say to a state, look, state, whoever you are, North Korea, Iran, whoever you are, we say, look, don't get nuclear weapons either, and we'll give you stuff, or else. Those are the things. Now, both of those things require promises. We say, if you do this, I promise I will give you this. If you don't do this, I promise I will punish you in this particular way. And that promise has to be credible. If I say, if you guys study really hard, I promise that I will give you all A's. Do you guys believe me when I say that? Like, is that a credible thing? I promise that I will make sure that you guys all graduate the university with a 4.0 average if you guys all study tonight. Like, do you really believe me? It's not a matter of whether I say I'm going to do this. It's about whether the other state believes it will be there so that its cost-benefit calculation will actually change. If there's no credibility, there's no deterrent. That's the whole thing. So when it comes to nuclear nonproliferation, the big conversation is I need a solution that is credible. I can say we will give lots of money to every state that doesn't get nuclear weapons, or we will do airstrikes on every state that does try to get nuclear weapons. That's great. The question is, do they believe you? And if they don't believe you, then there's no deterrent. So one of the things we want to talk about then is we want to talk about how do you enhance this? How do you enhance credible commitment? And well, it's at this point where I use the dating analogy. So just hang with me here on this. Credible commitment. So let's imagine that you are dating somebody. You've been dating somebody for, let's say 3 months. Let's make it 6 months. Let's make it a bit more drawn out. You've been dating someone for 6 months, and this person says to you, I love you. Do you believe them? It's a commitment, right? I'm saying, I love you. Do you believe them? Is this serious? Or someone says, yeah. So how do you know that person loves you? That's the question I have for you. This person says, I love you. How do you know that's true? If you can figure that out, you can also figure out and how they can enhance that, how they can make it more likely that you believe them. That's the same thing we have going on here. And there's some basic things that we use in political science to talk about this. One is called tying your hands. I know, creepy, talking about I love you, and then talking about tying your hands. But let me just talk about what this means. What you would do is you take the choice out of your control. Let me give you another example. It's the game of chicken example. Two cars are driving at each other. Here's a car. Here's a car. They're going to drive. This is bad cars. And they're going to drive at each other, okay? And what you want to do, it's a game of chicken. You want the other guy to swerve, and you don't want to swerve. Now, if they swerve and you don't, then you're super cool. If you swerve and they don't, they're super cool. But if neither one swerves, then you crash and everybody dies. So you really want them to swerve. And one of the ways you can do this is you can just take the steering wheel and toss it out the window and say, look, it's out of my hands. I can't turn if I wanted to, so you're going to have to turn. That's what we mean by taking the choice out of your control. Another thing you can do is you can just convince the other person that you are actually literally insane. If you're insane, then who knows if you'll take the choice is out of my control because I'm literally insane, so I can't, so maybe I won't turn. And so the other person turns. That's the whole idea here. Another way to do this that we talk about is called creating audience costs. All right, so just work with me here, for example. Let's say the United States comes out and says, look, and I'll take this example we have over here. The United States says to Syria, Syria, if you use nuclear weapons, we're going to use an airstrike on you. So don't use nuclear weapons. When Obama comes out and says that vocally, he creates what we call audience costs, which means he might say that in his head, and then if he doesn't follow through, there's no cost to it. But if he says it and then doesn't follow through, there's some cost because now everybody's heard him. That's what we mean by audience costs. You announce a particular course of action publicly, which then makes it harder to change course later. Not impossible, because, for example, in this instance, Barack Obama said, just kidding. I don't want to do that. Even though you use chemical weapons, you're cool. But this is the idea here, is you create these audience costs so that it's harder for you to back off it once it happens. And so that makes it more likely you're going to follow through, which makes your commitment credible. Another thing you can do is reputation. So let's say that I've had that game of chicken. I've played the game of chicken 50 times and I've never swerved. So if you're the 51st person going against me, do you think I'm going to swerve? Probably not. And so you're more likely to swerve. That's what we mean by reputation. How have I acted in the past? What about insane leaders? This is another sort of element here. Let me give you another example following this right here. So the United States says to all these countries, this is back in, let's say, 2000. Let's say back in 2000. 2000, the United States says to all these countries, do not get nuclear weapons. Libya, I'm looking at you, don't get nuclear weapons. South Africa, don't get nuclear weapons. North Korea, don't get nuclear weapons. Iraq, don't get nuclear weapons. Or else we'll bomb you. And they go, yeah, right, whatever. And so then 2003 happens, and the United States goes to war in Iraq on the argument that Iraq might have nuclear weapons, and so we're going to bomb the crap out of them. So after the United States says that and then follows through, are other states more likely to give up their nuclear weapons? And the answer is yes. It turns out that Libya was working on a nuclear weapons program, and rather than be the next Iraq, Libya voluntarily gave up their nuclear weapons program as part of that reputation. The United States has made clear they promised they're going to do this. They've acted on that promise. I don't want to be the next one, so we don't do that. Another thing that you can do to enhance your credible commitment is to sink costs. And what that means is to take actions connected to the promise that are costly. So, for example, if I say to this girl, I love you, and then I get her name tattooed, well, it may not be great evidence that I love her, but there's something going on there, because once her name's tattooed on, then I'm kind of stuck with all girls by that name. I can't really, say I love you and then start dating somebody else the next week having their name tattooed on me. Another example of this is the whole tradition of an engagement ring. An engagement ring is supposed to be like 3 months of your salary. So I buy this engagement ring, about 3 months of my salary. I give it to my prospective bride. Now, that's what we call a sunk cost, because if I come back the next day and say, oop, JK, don't really want to get married, she's got the ring. And so I am kind of, in a sense, by giving her the ring, I'm essentially saying, I'm not going to come back tomorrow and say JK. I'm going to say, let's get married. So that's what we mean by sunk cost. Take actions connected to the promise that are costly. So, for example, if I say, don't do this or else to a state, don't get nuclear weapons or else, and then they look like they're getting nuclear weapons, so I move a lot of military hardware up against their border and say, it's coming. I just moved some planes into the area that are ready to do an airstrike. That is a sunk cost. It's expensive to do that. I'm only doing that if I want you to know that I can't really just take back what I just said. A clear, costly communication of your intentions, mobilizing troops. All right, now, again, I don't know if any of this made sense because I can't really connect with you guys while this is like a video. But I do want you to think about, is there an issue of credible commitment in your particular project? What can be done to make the commitment more credible? If I say, yeah, I'll definitely do my part to clean the room, to clean our house, how do I make that commitment, yes, I will do this, more credible so that everyone believes me? Make sense? And that not just that it's like a fake, but so that there actually is this sense in which I really mean what I say. Trust me. All right. You're going to watch a video now, a TED Talk about small arms control. Small arms are just really anything except, we call them conventional weapons, but what we're really talking about here is stuff you can kind of hold, like handguns, machine guns, grenades, things like that. And I want you to listen to this video, the TED Talk video, and then we'll come back and talk about that kind of arms control, which is an incredibly different type of arms control than